change people's perceptions, inspire people. It's going to be great. So Charles, with your permission, we're gonna make a start.
Yeah, just 1 second, Loshini, just relax, okay? Just relax. Everybody relax. Smile. We're gonna have a great time, okay? Gary, over to you.
Over to me. Well, hold on a minute. We're gonna just go live.
Hey, Mariam's disappeared. Mariam, come back.
Well, Mariam has dropped out for a minute. There she is. Right.
You're back. Brilliant.
3, 2, 1. Onwards and upwards. Over to you, Charles.
Hello. Thank you for joining us. Very big welcome to our webinar today, How to Mobilize Public Support to Stop Global Warming. So this is the 7th of our 1.5 max webinars about action on global warming. Today, we've got 5 amazing speakers and we're very, very international. So we've got Eloise zooming in from Paris, France. We've got Jacob coming in from Texas and about apparently just 10 minutes walk from his 10 minutes drive from his house is the famous Trump border wall. And then from the UK, we've got a couple of our regular speakers. We've got Mariam and Loshini, and we're really, really pleased to have Dominic joining us today. So they're all going to help us to understand this very important subject of how to mobilize public support to stop global warming. So intros, let's just start off with myself and then hand over to our speaker team. My name is Charles Appleby. I'm the founder of NoCO2.org. Many people are wondering what to do about global warming. Now, we make it easy by enabling people to plant trees. Plant lots of trees and you can remove your carbon footprint. So to date, we've planted 412,000 trees, and that has created 4,100 days of paid work for families in extreme poverty. So over to the others. But first of all, very big thanks to Gary Kasulu of Loving Social for making these webinars possible.
It's my absolute pleasure.
Okay, so over to the team. Who'd like to start and introduce themselves? Mariam, what about you?
Okay, hi everyone, I'm Mariam. I'm 18, I'm the MYP for Hillingdon, and I will be studying international relations next year for university.
Fantastic, thank you. Do you just want to tell people what MYP is in case people don't know?
Sorry, yes, sorry, it's the Member of Youth Parliament.
Brilliant, thank you for that. Okay, who's next? Dominic.
Hello everybody, my name is Dominic Jones. And I'm from the UK. I'm 19 years old, and I was the economy delegate to the G7 Youth Summit this year, one of the official engagement groups of the G7. We put recommendations to world leaders this year before the G7 Summit, and the heart of that was sustainability. So really excited to be here today with some amazing speakers, and really excited to hear how we can effectively mobilise public support to stop global warming. So thank you for inviting me, Charles.
Well, Dominic, really, really pleased to have you here. First time I've been talking to a real person who was actually at Carbis Bay in Cornwall with the G7. And oh my goodness, you were the economy representative, top man, so important. Tell us more about that later. Great, so who'd like to go next? Eloise?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here tonight. So I'm Héloïse Lebrun from France. I currently work for the leading podcast in personal development in France. And I've also been volunteering for 5 years for Citizens Climate Lobby. And what I'm really passionate about is to understand how but also collectively, can we go from knowing to doing in this race for climate change? Thank you, Charles.
Okay, who's next? Loshini?
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here for another time. I've been at quite a few of these already, but still excited. My name's Loshini. I'm the Member of Youth Parliament for Brent in London. I'm also studying at university in my first year doing philosophy, politics and economics, and I work with Mariam on campaigns.
Loshini, so pleased to have you back. You always make a great contribution here. So please, so Jacob, first timer here, over to yourself.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for giving us the opportunity to be here. My name is Jacob Abdallah. I'm originally from Texas, recently graduated from Yale University this past May in environmental engineering and energy studies, and currently enjoying my summer off before I start working in Chicago in August.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us. Okay, so I don't know if you've heard, but the UK government has said that government ministers are going to answer questions from young people at COP26 from the stage. So we've got such a wonderful panel here and such enthusiastic people in the attendees as well, that what I'd just like to invite people to do is to sketch out your questions. So limit it to 1 or 2 questions each. So that invitation goes out to all of our panelists and to people in the attendees as well. So get the questions ready, get them typed up. Don't put them in the chat yet, or we'll lose track of them. So what we'll do later on, we'll invite you to pop your questions into the chat later. But for now, just to repeat, we're looking for everyone to put together 1 to 2 questions, the questions that you would ask UK government ministers, that's Conservative government ministers, on the stage at COP26. What would you be asking them if you're asking a question today? So just jot those down, get them ready to pop them into the chat for later on. Okay, so for now, what I think is really, really important and what people want to hear about, people actually want to hear about what government ministers are doing themselves to cut CO2, to take action personally on global warming. So let's just invite people, don't want to go around the table this time, but just to ask people, if you'd like to volunteer about something, some action that you've done yourself to cut CO2, to put together a group or something like that relevant to stopping global warming. So volunteers for that, who'd like to go first? Dominic, great.
I'm happy to go, and I'll keep it nice and simple. Something really easy that's done is just using the carless, just trying to use a bike, go out on a walk, using my own active travel instead of using the car, and trying to minimize it where I can, and car share. So something really simple that's made a big difference.
We can tell you're a politician. You've got the phrase to go with it as well, active travel. Okay, remember that one, everybody. Active travel from Dominic. Okay, who's next? Jacob.
I mean, one small thing that I've been doing is trying to reduce my red meat consumption. It's been kind of a long road, especially in South Texas, where barbecue is really big, but I think it makes a difference, and vegetables are delicious.
So that's a great point. There's been an amazing report there's been so many reports this week. It's just been incredible. But there's been a report out today by a food czar in the UK, and he's a guy who runs a restaurant chain. And what he's saying, the analysis he's done, he's saying 50% of the meat consumed in the UK is mince. And so what he's arguing, since people are already eating mince, they're not really going to notice if that mince is replaced by a vegetarian alternative. I mean, everyone's trying to create steak and they're trying to get the look and feel of steak. But he's saying, look, for 50% of customers, they're really not bothered. If someone can come up with a vegetarian plant-based alternative, job done. And his plan is for 1/3 of meat consumption in the UK to be reduced. So really interesting stuff. Thanks for that point, Jacob. And who's next? Okay.
I'll go ahead. For my part, I've been volunteering and trying to put my skills for NGOs. And so it's been helping with communication and put a message out there for climate change and solutions.
Okay, that's really, really important. Okay, does anybody else like to speak? Otherwise, we'll move swiftly on.
I don't mind chipping in a little bit here.
Okay, Lashini, great.
So just on behalf of the Youth Parliament in total, we've been working on trying to get the plastic bill debated in Parliament. So we're actually writing to our MPs at the moment. Mariam wrote a great letter that I've read myself, and I'm in the process of writing a letter to my MP. And just in general, when I'm out in the supermarket, I try to look for items without too much plastic packaging on them, or try to just buy my groceries without any packaging at all, which is really, really simple and easy to do, and something we often don't realise that we can do.
Great, thanks for that. Okay, so for myself, I think the most important thing is to cut one's own emissions. But then the question is, well, what about the rest? And this is where the tree planting comes in, because with the tree planting, you can actually remove all of your CO2 emissions. So basically, I've planted, I didn't want to underdo this, so I've planted 3,500 trees about 3 years ago now. And so what we do at No CO2, we make it really easy for people to plant trees. So you can donate £10, £20, £30, or the magic number, which is £187. Not for the US, by the way, that's for Europe. And that plants you 1,750 trees, which will remove 7 tons of CO2 per year. Sorry, Jacob, but for you, because you're in the US or Canada or Australia, you actually need to plant 4,000 trees to remove your average CO2 emissions. But anyway, be pleased to help people with that. So let's just then set the scene for the discussion today. So as I say, this is the 7th of these webinars. At the first one of the webinars in January, we set the aim that we want to achieve 1.5 max at COP26. Now, as people will know, at the Cornwall meeting, the G7 meeting in Cornwall just last month, G7 leaders agreed a 1.5 commitment. So the agreement is to keep 1.5 in reach. So could be a little bit stronger, but there again, we've made real progress there. But what came out in the discussion is that there's the argument that really, unless there is public support for action on global warming, then this will just go away. It'll get sidelined by other stuff. I mean, it's already being sidelined by stuff to do with COVID and rules about changes of rules and all sorts of things, but it will get sidelined. And that's where this webinar has come from. So what this webinar is all about is really how to build, galvanize that, mobilize that public support so that we can make the case to world leaders to go with 1.5 and get 1.5 degrees centigrade max agreed strongly at COP26. So that's where we're from. So over to you speakers. Give you your space here. Who'd like to go first and talk about what your thoughts are, your ideas, your plans, your proposals to mobilize people to help stop global warming? Over to you. So pop your microphone on. Who'd like to go first?
I'll go first.
Mario,
okay.
Great.
I think a big way that we can mobilize support is actually through education. And this education isn't limited to just young people. I'm talking about education for adults as well. Education can be like instilled in subjects for young people, but there should also be courses and activities that adults can do that promote understanding of the environment and making a change in your life. And these subjects, it's not something that can be done in the future. It's something that can actually be done right away. If you change the curriculum that young people have, then you are already straight away putting in their mind about the environment. It's at the front of their mind, and it'll be a core issue for them, and all the way up into their adulthood. And even then, for adults, when they do courses and activities that the council, whatever, or any higher borough, etc., wherever you may be around the world, has for them, it will also bring that educational aspect that adults can have and learn about the environment and the problems that we are causing if we don't make change.
Now, let me just ask you the question. If other people have got questions, then come in on this one as well. But the question I'd just like to ask you, Mariam, is that when you use the word education, people think about things which are quite long term. So do you have anything here which really makes it an urgency, which makes it deals with the short term in terms of getting action in the short term rather than a sort of a longer term view of this?
I think when we think about education, it does seem like a long-term thing, but it doesn't have to be that. This awareness can build into activities that you do locally, grassroots activities. And even then, if we look at education and we're thinking about it, if we had like a mobile app, something funded from the government, that could be immediate things. It doesn't have to be just information. It can be small activities that you do that promote looking after the environment, caring about what you're doing, which are immediate things. They might give a notification about to do with your consumption, advice to do with what you buy and what type of meat you buy. You know, small things, but they can immediately impact you if you get them right away.
Great points. So look, anybody else got a mobile app? Maybe a bit controversial. What do other people think? Is the mobile app going to work here? Who's got a view on that? Eloise.
Yeah, I definitely think that information is key. And the best way to go forward is to make it easy for people. Today we have so much data coming in and also a lot of fake data. So it's nice to have tools that help us make informed decisions.
Brilliant. Okay. Jacob.
I think to expand on Mariam's point about having activities that people can do, I know one thing that we do here is a lake cleanup. So Easter is a big holiday here. People go to the lake and kind of have like barbecues and leave trash. So there's always a yearly lake cleanup the day afterwards. I think like small things like that are local cleanups that like people enjoy going to the lake, and you go the week after and you see all the trash laying around from people celebrating from the week before. So getting people engaged to do these things and care about their local environments just kind of spur just a feeling of wanting to protect what you actually care about, and what like having more of a local sense of protecting the climate.
Yeah, Dominic.
I'd have to completely agree on that point. Climate education, it's really important that we show people from a really early age the importance of this issue, and showing people that actually it's not just another short-term issue. It's the bone of our existence. Without our planet, that there's no human race. One of the policies that we put to G7 leaders was to mandate climate change education by 2022. And as part of that, it wouldn't just be, oh, the world's on fire, or we've got to do something about it. We'll be showing the different areas, in particular, man-made disasters, looking at the ecological degradation and the importance of biodiversity as well. So it's about showing that it's not just, whilst it's very important to show that it's an issue and why it's an issue, it's important to kind of show that level of depth. And obviously, as it becomes age appropriate, people learn more and more about why they can be kind of active climate citizens and how they can do that. So it's very, very important that we kind of change people very, through education, through the power of education is a great way. So great point, and great innovative ideas as well as to how to do it.
Dominic, but just tell us, you put that point to the G7 about climate education. So what's any sort of feedback did you get, or just sort of just a blankness?
Unfortunately, on that point, it was a blank response. We were ignored. We were ignored on a lot of things, but that's not to say it's not important. We still should keep on banging the drum, because if people grow up thinking it's not a problem, then they'll behave in that way, and we need to essentially do the opposite.
Great. Work in progress. Okay, so who'd like to go next?
I would love to chip in again.
Yoshini, great.
As I always say, I think social media is one of our biggest tools. And actually, from a personal story, I think it was yesterday I was on TikTok and I learned about this man in Peru who designed his own filtration powder for a lake in his area and managed to clean the entire lake. So the way he did it was he puts powder in the lake, and all the bacteria and the impurities sink to the bottom, and he can then collect them up, and he actually managed to bring the wildlife back to this lake and actually saved the biodiversity. So I think on the one hand, we need to inform people of the issue at hand, but we also need to inform them of the solutions that are being created every single day. I think there's a huge negative stigma around the environment, and it seems often like this huge problem that we can't solve, and a lot of people like to think, how can I solve it when I'm just one person on earth? How am I going to solve this huge problem? But if we show them that there are so many different solutions out there and there's so much being done every day, I think that's also another step towards the future. And just quickly building on that point, I think a lot of people don't realize how easy it is to make change, or how much we can use our voice at the moment. And one of those ways is, I know in the UK, talking to your MP or even sending a letter into your MP, you know, these public figures are there almost to serve us, and they should be listening to our voices. So even just telling them of a proposal you might have, talking about something that's happening in your area that you don't agree with, maybe, you know, plastic pollution in your area, or you know, pollution you're seeing from a factory that might have opened up in your borough, that's something that you can voice to your MP, and they should be able to listen to you, and they almost have to reply to that. So, you know, it's about showing people there are so many solutions out there, and they're really easy to do, and, you know, we have to mobilize that kind of aspect of it.
Certainly, I think that writing to your MP has sort of fallen down the list a bit with a lot of people. I mean, it would be good, Lashini, if afterwards you could share with us any examples of how to do that, any examples of any letters that you or Mariam have done. I think myself that sharing the letters on social media or LinkedIn or whatever can really help, because it gives people a template they can build on. But Eloise, for Citizens Climate Lobby, your organization, I think, is really, really good, aren't you, at contacting MPs, representatives. Do you want to chip in on this one? Tell us a bit more about that.
Sure. I mean, we're quite lucky. It's been it started in 2006 in the US, and it's a very structured and organized NGO, and basically we're trained as citizens of how to contact MEP office. We have examples of different letters we could write. We also get training on how to conduct a meeting with an MEP. So basically, it's kind of like a hands-on training of lobbying. So it makes it really, really easy for anyone without any prior training to just jump in and get support to make our voices heard. And I also agree, we don't realize how much impact we have as citizens. And that's really what I loved about Citizens Climate Lobby, is I suddenly realized, like, oh, wow, I'm actually talking to government people. Right now, we're talking to the European Parliament, and we've had about 70 meetings with different deputies since last year, and it's really effective. It works. So that's really what the message I want to put through. Super. As well. Like, it actually works.
Well, Eloise, do pop something in the chat about how to contact Citizens Climate Lobby in the UK or Europe or whatever. And thanks to Emma Stevens, one of the participants, who has been writing to their MPs, and she said that the MP replied pretty quickly and got a good response. And then Dennis Harvey is saying that he wrote to his MP as well. Okay, so who'd like to go with their next big point about mobilizing action to stop global warming? Who's next? Need a volunteer here.
I'm happy to go.
Eloise, okay.
So yeah, it's actually linked to the work we do with the Citizens Climate Lobby, and it's about carbon pricing. So we know now there's a lot of individual action that people do, but carbon pricing is the way to create a systemic change. And we can see with in France, the example, the government tried to implement a tax, and then we had the yellow vests. And we have a great example of a policy, a carbon tax that's working, is in Canada. And the way they made it efficient and get public support is that they actually redistribute the revenue to citizens. And the government that implemented this idea actually got re-elected, with 65% of voters chose the carbon tax with the revenue. So it's called carbon fee and dividend in Canada, and in Europe we call it climate income.
Okay, so I've read in the paper just over a week ago that the UK government is considering this model, what they're calling the Ontario model, where money is collected and money is paid back to citizens, and from what I've read, it's particularly good for redistributing money to people on lower income. So do you want to just tell us a little bit, Eloise, about the impact if people are on lower income, then with this arrangement, what happens with them?
Yeah, absolutely. So there have been some studies made in the US, some models by economists, and it turns out about 65% of the lower incomes will benefit from the solution. And that's on the basis that the money is redistributed equally between citizens. Nevertheless, I think in the UK, they're looking at redistributing only to lower and middle income, which means they'll have an even larger envelope at the end of the month. So it definitely has a good impact on lower income families. So
this is such an important subject. What about anybody else from the UK? Any thoughts on this as to whether this is a good idea or any problems with this? Dominic, Mariam, Lashini, do you want to chip in on this?
I think it's a good idea. I think it's actually a very good idea. It's a true way of really putting forward the idea about the environment, because it's somewhat like an incentive. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it does make people start to care more about the environment, knowing that the outcome of this is a redistribution, and I think that will give a positive sort of view that the UK will have.
As always, Mariam, you put this really, really well. Okay, does anybody else want to, has anybody else got a view on this, or shall we move on to someone else's topic?
I was just going to quickly compare it to, I think it's a good idea because I know in the UK, if you might know already, but the ULEZ zone is expanding. But at the same time, they're expanding the ULEZ zone, charging more, but they haven't subsidized public transport, which should be, where this money is going to. And they should be improving our public transport services, allowing low-income families who are often going to be, at the brunt of this new ULEZ charge. So I think that idea of redistributing that money is really, really great. And it's almost better than, the new ULEZ zone. I don't know if people are aware of this in the UK.
Brilliant. So you're linking it to the transport situation. Dominic.
Yeah, if I could just come in from the perspective that we did, and the example that's used based on that approach, Lashina, is Wales, where they, as a result of having a Future Generations Commissioner for Wales, have decided to not spend any more money on upgrading roads or motorways or anything like that. And that's an interesting policy. But it's about ensuring that everybody can benefit, and I think the policy that's been implemented in the way that Eloise describes or is being considered enables everyone of all incomes to kind of feel like they've got a role to play in the fight against climate change and can actually benefit from that. And I'll say a little bit more about this later, is that we should show people why it's a good thing and support them to do just that, and this does that.
I mean, for me, Dominic, this raises a tricky question, which is that, if you're someone who's regularly sitting in traffic jams, like getting to work or whatever, you're in a city where there's a real problem with traffic, you're looking to have a bypass, you're really looking forward to the bypass. And, because of these ideas, if that bypass in England is now cancelled and you're threatened with with sitting in the traffic for another whatever years, I mean, what sort of thing does one say to people who are caught up in this sort of situation, though?
It is a really tricky position, and thank goodness I'm not a policymaker at the moment. But it's important, isn't it? If we are serious about reducing our emissions, stopping the world from heating up, we have to make bold policy decisions, and this is probably the start of things to come. And my personal opinion is we should kind of do things soon that prevent further damage later. And if this is what needs to be done, the damage will only be worse if it's not taken. So I'm not fully in support of it, but I do think it does raise the interesting question as to how we spend our money. And New Zealand have been also quite revolutionary. They haven't diverted money in this way or in the way it's proposed. They've actually supported greener initiatives as well. So not quite the whole scale shift, but kind of doing them both at the same time. So a bit of a mixed match. So just different things we need to consider, but it's still a very serious situation.
Okay. Okay. So in terms of the your proposals, your ideas, Jacob, is it your turn?
Yeah, sure. I think one thing that I think is important that I already kind of touched on is focusing on the community impacts of global warming and showing, I think that's where people will really start to see how they're being affected. And I know I guess the UK is a much smaller country, but in the US, there's so many different biomes across the country that will be affected differently. So focusing on the local climate impacts of how climate change will be affecting that community in particular, and trying to find ways to improve that. I know one thing that is relevant for my community is the border wall. So for a long time with Trump's border wall, a lot of people tried to make it a political issue. And regardless of the state of immigration, there's a lot to be said on that, but that's a whole other topic. Regardless of immigration, the border wall sought to destroy our watershed and was going to be built in the floodplain. And so many of our border communities receive 100% of our drinking water from the Rio Grande. So they're just, by focusing on or like depoliticizing these issues and making it more of how these political endeavors that politicians try to do just to gain more support and win the elections, regardless of, or just focusing on how that will impact the environment, and especially in the face of hotter summers here and longer droughts, in the face of climate change. Destroying our watershed is kind of the last thing that we need to be doing. So focusing on the local climate impacts that will kind of get communities to fight against bad policy or fight for better policy.
This is a really important point about the different types of environments. Certainly in the UK, there's an issue with buildings generally that I think that local authorities have been quite slow to suggest improvement, to enforce improvements to buildings. Does anybody else want to talk to that issue for their own regional area? Okay. So we've got a question here. Brian's asked a question about, Brian Rutter's asked a question in the chat about planting trees. I mean, where we plant the trees in the tropics, so the trees actually grow they grow much, much faster. I mean, they grow literally 3 times faster than they do in the Northern Hemisphere. And with mangroves, they sequester even more CO2. So in terms of the, I mean, these places, the life of the tree is maybe only 20 to 30 years. So I would argue that the carbon sequestration is significant way before the sort of 15 to 20 years that you've talked about. Of course, it is different in here in the Northern Hemisphere in temperate zones. Okay, so let's move on then to other major points that people would like to make. Who'd like to go next with any other proposals about Dominic? Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I've just got 2 points to make in terms of the public support side. I'm not expert on climate change, but I'd like to think I'm a bit of an expert in being a young person. Young people do need to be at the heart of it, and as part of that, it's not just about young people now, it's about kind of the impact future. So kind of the overarching point is consider the impact on future generations in every single thing that's done, and essentially the top of that list is climate, because if we don't tackle the climate, what are we here for? If a nation can't feed its people, what are we to do? So that's the overarching point. In terms of public support, we've got to do things, and there's been a lot of one recently, and there's been not a lot of the other recently. We've got to scare people because it's pretty serious. Essentially, the world's on fire, as Greta said, is all that kind of stuff. Extinction Rebellion did a great job in scaring people, in kind of waking people up to the seriousness of the situation. And the other thing we need to do is actually show people the good side and why it's a good thing. Think about the positives. And one of the great things about not the great things about climate change, because it's a bad thing, about the green transition is the word I'm going to use, is jobs. Is the opportunity for innovation, the opportunity for expansion in the green sector. There's going to be a lot of money as a result of green transition. Renewables, wind, potentially electric cars, gigafactories, things like that will be needed to fuel not just the transition to a green society, but the actual green society itself. So I think we need to kind of wave the flag for the good stuff that's happening, whilst also kind of keeping people alert to the seriousness of the situation. And that comes in a number of ways, because crisis management is the last point of call. That's when we need to be really, really panicked. And yes, we are kind of quite scared at the moment, but the crisis management needs to be better. And part of that is particularly considering countries and regions, even in Western states where there's underfunding and there's structural issues and things. That needs to be addressed so that people can respond well to any sort of climate crisis, anything like that. But also sustainable resource management as well. So we're talking things like biodiversity, things like trees. It's such a simple thing, but it can make a massive difference as well. So you've got kind of the immediate and dangerous response if there's a crisis, and then you've got that preventative kind of approach. But then on the other end, you kind of really have to keep green a priority. It's not just a one-trick pony. It's not just a kind of another issue. It should be at the heart of everything that's done, and that comes at, in that future generations approach. How can we keep things sustainable? And that's why I use the word sustainable, because if we're not here and things are not functioning well in the future, then what are we as a society? So I think those 2 points are to kind of take away. A little bit of scared, but also keeping things nice and positive. I'm a positive person, so I see the green transition as a great thing to do. But then overarching all of that should be that future generations approach.
So Dominic, you're the man. You've got these phrases off to a T, haven't you? So here we are, Dominic, with his green transition and his green priorities. Absolutely brilliant. I mean, I really like that. I think you put very nicely the combination of scaring and waking up, but also showing the good side. I mean, for me, I think a piece that's missing here is really the solution. What the solution is about. What the future. What sort of future we have with these changes. And certainly that I think can be pretty positive. So Dominic's made some great points here. Anybody else like to chip in on what Dominic's had to say?
Yeah, I would love to say something about jobs, because I think that's one thing that's concerning a lot of people. So back to the Canada example. So British Columbia was the first state to implement a carbon price in 2008, and so there's been a few years of testing out, and the result is that yes, it's working. It's different jobs, and there hasn't been a loss of jobs. There just has been a transition in terms of what people do. So yeah, I just want to say that we have examples of an effective climate policy that's changing the energy landscape in the right direction, but also supporting people.
Super. Anybody else like to talk on that one? Okay, so well, let's invite someone else then to bring one of their major proposals to the table. Who'd like to do that?
I'll say something.
Great.
I think this goes off of Jacob's previous point, but a way to really mobilize public support is to actively have community work out there, because it's usually, and I say this in terms of speaking in the UK, it's usually small activities that are done in the council. It's actually quite hidden. I think there should be more activities, more community work that is evident, that isn't just being one thing that we clean the streets for one day. No, I think it should be some regular activities and community work that brings unity. And once you have unity, you have this thorough engagement with all sorts of people and all ages. And I think that's important in getting people, mobilized in the work that they can do.
Super. I mean, it's supporting the point that Jacob made earlier. Does anybody else want to talk to this point?
Yeah, I have one that's, I think, similar to, or kind of goes off of Dominic's point, in speaking about the positives of acting on climate. There's also the co-benefits of different things. I think one is public health benefits. And one big issue for the border community is tractor trailer idling and emissions. We're one of the largest inland ports, so there's any kind of highway or street in Laredo is full of 18-wheelers, and they kind of sit idling in neighborhoods and our community. So cutting those emissions not only helps cut CO2 emissions of global warming, but also helps cut like sulfur oxides and other pollutants that affect our public health. And that's, I think, something that should also be talked about, and is also a very strong point for getting people to care about this issue. I think climate change can kind of be a really large issue to wrap our heads around, and people can kind of get overwhelmed by it. But if you talk about how it's going to affect your children's lung capacity for their entire lives, or their medical bills, especially in a community like ours where we have 30% poverty levels and half the people don't have medical and health insurance, that's something that people latch onto more effectively than kind of talking about the larger issue of climate change on a global scale. Okay, so what you're saying, in your community, you've got 30% of people are in poverty and 50% are not able to afford the medical system in the US. I think we have double the average rate of people without health insurance. Wow. Okay, that's serious. Okay, so the question of idling with trucks. So we've now got in the latest, in newer cars in the UK, we've had for quite a few years, probably we've had for 10 or 15 years now. We've had a thing where if the car is warmed up and you come to a complete halt, the car stops, the car engine stops and it restarts. And we've got used to that now. When it first came in, people were thinking, oh my goodness, what do I do now? But that's worked well. But this is on lorries as well. So for example, lorries that are made by DAF in Europe, a standard, these lorries have a 30-second cutout. So if you're in a big lorry and you come to your destination, or you come to a complete halt on the motorway for a while, 30 seconds and the engine will cut out. It gives you a warning notice to say it's going to cut out. But if you press the accelerator, then it will keep it running. So in the US, sounds as if, Jacob, you don't have these things, or is it older trucks, or should this be something that your environment agency, EPA, is introducing a standard on all new trucks in the US? So you have the same facility? I think there are some policies of the sort. I think one issue that the US has is a disconnection between state and federal authorities. Like there are certain states have really progressive policies on tractor trailer idling and other vehicle emissions. California is one that has pretty good policies, but conservative states like Texas are kind of lag behind. So I think that's one issue that the US faces. Okay, so has anybody else got any major points they'd like to make?
I think
Yeah.
Go for it.
I was just going to bring in a point that's quite kind of similar to Jacob and Mariam's, and it's just about, they've spoken about community, but I also want to ask our kind of attendees and our panelists about making it personal. How does the climate affect you personally, and what is your responsibility? Because we always like to hold, corporations to account, and we ask them and governments about their responsibility, which fair enough, they're the big leaders in this issue. but we can also look at ourselves and think, what's our responsibility and where can we improve, our carbon footprint? And I think one of the biggest changes we've seen is the fast fashion industry. A lot of people have turned and realized about their clothing and their carbon footprint due to the clothing, and also food, the amount of emissions that come from farming animals. So there are small changes, and I think there are different aspects of our lives that we can reflect on and think about how we can reduce our footprint in terms of those. So, obviously in terms of clothing, that's looking at, secondhand clothing, donating your clothing, not trying to go in with, fast fashion trends and having to buy a new piece of clothing every day or every week. And then with food, it's just small, simple changes you can make. And I think the biggest thing is substitutes. I think a lot of people like to ask vegans, why are you trying to make steak vegan? Why are you trying to make chicken vegan? It just makes our lives easier, and it makes it easier for other people to transition. I went vegan in 2017. It was really hard to find a substitute. And now, there are so many on the market. And every time I go to restaurants now, I tend to, eat vegan when I'm out because it's just a lot easier, and it's become a lot easier. So I think it's not only about looking at these big corporations and governments, holding them to account, but also thinking about ourselves and what we can do in our communities and in our lives.
Okay, so Dennis Harvey's made the point that when drivers turn their engines off, they often say they need the heat or the air conditioning on. Yeah, so certainly in the Far East, people do that, I know. So I think it's back down to maybe the asking the government, the regulators, to to take action on this to make the systems work properly. Okay. So look, if anybody else has got any main points they'd like to make, otherwise we'll move on to the next stage. Anybody else like to say anything?
Yeah, I just want to make a really quick point, actually on the back of what Lushini and Dominic said as well. Around communication, I think it's really important not to shame people. I think it's really important to encourage people, whatever they do. Not everyone is going to go vegan. Not everyone is going to, start living in a self-sufficient house with, growing their own vegetables. So I think it's really, really important to keep it positive and just celebrate people's victory of small things they do every day.
Great, thank you. I mean, I would say myself, something that's really been missing for me is this point about communication from the UK government. I feel that the government maybe should be more honest that they can't do everything themselves. And Dominic, I mean, you were there at the G7. The G7 communique is really saying that the G7 are trying to do everything. I feel myself that the governments of the world would be better to say, look, we can't do everything. We actually need people to work with us, to support us. And with that information and communication coming from the government, using Mariam's mobile app, then we're in a position, I think, to have much more support for all of these grassroots campaigns, activities, planting trees, all the other things that people have talked about here. So for me, that information communication combined with education is a really, really big thing. Yes, Jacob.
I just want to say I really resonate with Louise's point about celebrating small victories along the road. And I think another thing that's important is encouraging people to come along with you in your small victories. I think, yeah, just like if you're going to a thrift shop instead of a fast fashion store, kind of like bringing your friends along, or if you're ordering a vegetarian plate instead of a meat-based plate, kind of encouraging people around you to come with you. I think word of mouth is the most powerful influencer that we all have. So kind of using not just like our social media platforms, but our day-to-day activities and bringing people along with us.
Amazing. That is such an important point, Jacob. Just back to word of mouth. Dominic.
Yeah, just building on your point, Charles, there's a really important role for the private sector here. And we've seen, supermarkets trying to reduce plastic. That's brilliant. That's kind of the start. The next is to support the ambition that, fingers crossed, government and experts share. And that includes things like switching to electric vehicles. That includes things like reducing transport costs of the products across the world. there kind of needs to be a consideration that actually these changes make a big difference because of the scale that a lot of these companies are on, and chucking government money at certain projects can only go so far. It has to be about using the power and the strength that these companies have to support government efforts and public efforts themselves as well. So it's kind of got to be a team effort, team climate, as you could call it.
Oh no, Dominic, you're the man. Another of your phrases, team climate. They just roll off the tongue with you, don't they? Okay. So now we get back to this this thing I raised at the beginning, which is your questions. So if everyone would like to now pop your questions into the chat. So what I said earlier, if you missed it, is that the UK government said ministers are to answer questions from young people at COP26 in November. So earlier on, I invited panelists and everybody to prepare 1 to 2 questions and to pop them into and to get the questions ready. So if you now would like to pop your question into the chat and just give a bit of space for these questions, and we hopefully can see everybody's questions popping up in the chat. So Gary, you might have a question as well for people.
Always got something to ask. This is great stuff. I love it. Tell me, at home, what are the impacts that you make at home individually? Because that can inspire people to just the most simple things. It's worth starting with Jacob. He's the furthest away geographically. Jacob, what do you do at home to make that small difference?
One thing that I bought for my parents was reusable produce bags for the grocery store instead of getting the plastic bags every single time you get produce. I think it makes a big difference in the long run if you use like 5 to 6 produce bags every week. I thought it was helpful.
I love that. Miriam, you're the youngest. Tell us what you do.
So actually there are quite a few things. I think one of the most obvious things for me is because I'm 18 I can now drive, but that doesn't mean I stop using public transportation. I carry on using that. I think that's so important. But then if I think even more personally at home, small things like growing fruits, we do that in our house. We have loads of fruits, pears, potatoes, any small fruits and foods that you can actually grow at home, I think is so useful instead of having to get plastic packaging and drive or go by transportation all the way to shops. Actually having it at home is a really good way of just conserving everything.
They say enthusiasm is infectious, and I just you radiate that enthusiasm. Do you know, I have to share this with the panel because I'm no expert like you, but today I spoke to someone who's so cynical about everything, and he said, this recycling thing, the bin men just throw it in the same one anyway, it's all nonsense. Dominic, how would you respond to that? The cynics.
Oh, the cynics! Oh, give me a cynic any day, and I'll challenge them. You get them for every issue, don't you? In terms of the climate cynic, it's a case of looking to what's changing for the worse here. Looking at the floods in Europe, looking at the heat waves in North America. I mean, even flooding in the UK is really bad. Yes, we've had it, but it's been worse and worse. Looking at the droughts. In areas where there just never has been droughts, just saying, why do you think that is? Why do you think things are changing? And showing again that positive side of things where there has been a difference. So I'm talking some of the impacts of low traffic neighbourhoods and the impact on air quality and pollution and the bringing down of deaths and respiratory problems. Again, just that two-pronged approach is for me always best. A mix of good cop and bad cop hopefully should work with the cynics.
Okay, thank you, Dominic. That's really great. If I can just say to people, I'm not quite sure what's happened here, but in my chat, I'm not getting many questions coming through. Gary, what about you? The last one I've got is Dominic's question.
Let's have a look.
So if this is open to everybody, but people on the panel, if you'd like to type in 1 or 2 questions.
Well, Dennis Harvey said, do you think the public should support the notion of carbon budget, etc.?
Okay, well, look, get your questions flowing through. But the first question here is Dominic's question. if you're a teacher. So look, I'd like to invite, so our panelist who's closest to this is Mariam. So Mariam, would you like to be a Conservative government minister on stage at COP26? And Dominic, would you like to ask your own question of Mariam? So Mariam, are you okay with that?
Sure, I'll try.
So,
Secretary
of State.
Hold on a minute, Dominic. Hold on. Just hold on. Just hold your horses a little bit. Give Mariam a little bit of space. I would like some more people to come through with their questions, and particularly people from the panel. Okay, so Dominic, off you go.
So, Secretary of State Miriam Malik for the Environment, I'd like to ask you, if you're a teacher, what would your first lesson in climate education be, and why would that be the most important topic to cover first?
So if I was doing a lesson on climate change, I think the first thing is to define climate change and state about local problems and the global problems that we have, and that is introducing young people immediately to the obvious things that they can see, and then from there expanding onwards about what they can do, solutions, and etc. And your second point was why is it the most important subject, I think, and then I would link the why it is the most important subject, and you would link it to other subjects around. So you would show comparisons where the climate change is evident in other subjects as well. And so when you come and when you bring all the subjects together, in the center of it, climate change is an issue that all subjects that they study face.
Okay, so Dominic, you've got first option for asking a follow-up question to the minister.
Just my follow-up question is in terms of the area within climate change. Why is it the most important to kind of cover first in all the areas that relate to climate change? Why this topic?
Sorry, you cut out. I didn't hear the last part.
No worries. Why this topic out of all the areas in climate change? Why this one?
It's something that it's not something that just impacts businesses or whatever. It impacts every person individually, and so it's important that each person has this understanding, has this education and knowledge about the effects and the problems that come with it.
Super. Thanks so much for that, Tin. Great fun there, Mariam. Thank you so much for your answers. So, okay, so I'm in trouble with Dennis Harvey because he's put the questions in the Q&A. Okay, so his question in the Q&A, interesting question for this one, I think, is for Eloise. Okay, so the question is, if you're not seeing it there, do you think the public would support the notion of a carbon budget, e.g. 565 gigatons, that's for the world, yeah, with an NGO giving a monthly update on what is left? So Eloise, this is what do you think of that? So question, do you think the public would support the notion of a carbon budget, e.g. 565 gigatons worldwide, with an NGO giving a monthly update on what is left? Okay, what do you think, Eloise?
So I'm just trying to understand if I'm understanding the question correctly. So we would have a global, say, carbon budget, so how much carbon is consumed, and then the NGO would be just sharing information on the state of it. I mean, information is always interesting, but what I'm wondering is like, how do we do such a thing? Because like in terms of, if we think that already just for a country, it's hard to be able to track our emissions and have like kind of very precise information on a, say, day-to-day basis. I think it would be a bit challenging to do it at a global level, but I like the idea of having some kind of having a budget and then having an account to that. So I think it's definitely helpful for people to have data that they can rely on, and it's like it's encouraging because then they see their efforts. But it might be a bit depressing to have it as a, I don't know, at a global level. I don't know if it would be encouraging or depressing, because we all know it needs to move fast, and then it's not moving fast enough. So yeah, it's a good question to know if that would be helpful or you know, depressing people more.
Okay, is it right that the UN does publish this sort of data occasionally?
I mean, we do have global figures, obviously, of carbon, you know, and that's we need those figures to.
Okay, so I think the point is here is that the question is that really by, like, we've got in the UK, we have daily figures. We have daily figures of coronavirus cases and deaths and whatever. So I think that what the question comes down to is that by making this a regular update, not necessarily daily, but making this a regular update, would it actually put this into people's mind, and would it get them doing something about it? I mean, myself, I think it would, because you look out for this. I mean, the paper on coronavirus, the papers have this data every day, and people are asking about it. So I guess for me, the answer would be to Dennis, yes, I think this would make a difference. But Eloise, it would make a difference, but is it a good idea? Is it going to work if we do it that way?
I mean, I would say we should try everything. You know, there's there's so much to do that it would be good. I mean, why not try? But the effort we need to do for climate change is I'd say a lot more than with the coronavirus, right? You know, we're talking about decades, and the idea is like, are people gonna keep track during decades daily of figures? But I mean, I think the idea of just knowing where we are is important, of course.
Okay, so we've got a couple of economics type of questions here. So let's ask, we've got two economists on our team here. So let's ask Lashini to have a look at this one. Okay, so this is from Emma Stevens. So Emma, thank you for your question. Emma's saying, how can emissions be reduced from transport now, as currently electric cars are expensive and building new transport routes for buses, trains takes time? So the question is, how can emissions be reduced from transport now, as currently electric cars are expensive and building new transport routes for buses, trains takes time? Lashini, would you like to have a go at that one?
Public transport is quite a big issue, and there's obviously, you know, a lot to it. But I think, you know, investing in subsidising public transport is really important. So, you know, for under 18s, we do have free travel in London, and that does make a huge difference. A lot of people who might drive actually choose to take public transport. So I think subsidising public transport is a key move that can be taken to do this. Another one I thought of, which I guess is a bit more creative, is actually, you know, implementing bike lessons in schools and education around bikes, because, you know, bikes are relatively cheap to buy. They're a long-term investment, and actually they're a useful way of, you know, getting around a city, especially like London, where, you know, things are quite close to one another. I know, you know, around the country that isn't really the same, so it's a little bit harder, but I think definitely outside of London and big cities like Birmingham and Manchester, there's a lot of money that can be put towards public transport systems, especially buses and tram services. So I think I know that, you know, electric cars are very expensive, but money should be put towards subsidizing public transport systems and encouraging other modes or alternative modes of transport, i.e., you know, bikes, especially for kids, taking kids to school, things like that. Even scooters, and even e-scooters are looking like a really good alternative mode of transport that have significantly less emissions than, you know, cars and motorcycles.
Super, thank you for that. Okay, so Lashini, you've put an interesting question in here about how to hold polluters, more specifically corporations, to account, and is the 2050 target realistic? So I think, Dominic, I think you're the man for this one. So Lashini, would you like to ask your question of Dominic, and then let's ask the same question of Jacob in the role of Biden or John Kerry. So let's have two goes at this one, because the answer of the US might be different. Jacob, you've got an advantage here because you've got Dominic batting first. Okay, Lashini, so ask your question, please, for Dominic.
I'm going to assume by his charm, I'm going to address him as Prime Minister Dominic Jones. So, Prime Minister, how are you going to hold polluters, and more specifically corporations, to account? And is the 2050 target realistic?
I think the 2050 target's more than realistic. We can all do it as hashtag Team Climate, and as part of that, corporations and the biggest companies have to play their part as well. So I would love to have monthly climate publishing for every single company on a par with things like gender pay reporting and things like that, just to improve that transparency and that openness, and every company as a result should kind of be aware of what their actions do and hopefully respond to that. 2050 can be done. I wish I could bring it back forward, but unfortunately we've got to bring people along with us. So hopefully by 2050 that's a bit more realistic.
Well, I'm so pleased that you had a power failure during the answer, Dominic, because the answer is just stunning, and I think people would be unsure about as to how realistic that is. So, Lashini, have another go. Give us another question to Dominic.
I actually want to follow up on that question. What is the direct action that your government is taking towards the 2050 target, and how can we speed up this process, or perhaps, as you say, bring that target closer?
I'm the Prime Minister, the actual Prime Minister, so I've not been briefed. But as far as I'm aware, the UK is kind of leading the world in this 2050 target. Of course, it does have further to go, but it's impressive. The investment in renewables, particularly things like gigafactories, as the UK moves towards electric cars. And one of the things off the top of my head is from 2030 there'll be no more sales of diesel or petrol cars. They'll all be electric. So that kind of thing, the move towards just a more sustainable way of life that's less dependent on fossil fuels, we want to instill that in every single UK citizen. I mean, we all want to, hopefully, across the world. That'd be great.
That's amazing, Dominic. And I think we're getting such a great question. I think we're going to run this question as well in a minute. We're going to have Eloise answering for Macron. But first of all, let's have Jacob answering this question for Joe Biden or John Kerry. So, Lashini, do you want to rephrase the question for the American audience here?
I'm unaware if there is a similar target in the US. I assume there might be. But President Jacob, how do you propose that you're going to hold corporations, especially large American corporations, to account for their pollution? And what kind of targets do you aim to set for emissions in the coming future?
I think it'd be important to have corporations have a certain limit of emissions, and with some climate reporting on an either monthly or yearly basis. And then just making sure that they are keeping up with their budgets, and if not, having some tax consequences.
Fantastic. Great. So, Lashini, another great answer. Have you got another follow-up question for President Jacob here?
President Jacob, you've mentioned corporations, but talking about communities specifically, how can you unite the entirety of the United States of America in their communities to do more towards climate change?
I think it's about bringing people together to focus on their families and their loved ones. Climate change is always talked about as a global issue, and I think it's easy to get disconnected from that. But by focusing on or thinking about how your families and your loved ones will be affected by this, I think can bring people together, focus on the relationships that we have and the people that we care about.
Amazing. That is such a great answer, Jacob. So, Eloise, are you okay to, do you want to answer it as a Macron character, or, well, he's the president, so yeah, let's go for Macron. Okay, Lashini, European, EU, French answer to your question. What's your question to Macron?
President Eloise, as Macron, how do you propose that you can hold to account massive polluters, especially in the EU and ones that affect France directly? And what kind of targets do you propose to set for carbon emissions? And what kind of policies do you aim to implement that won't affect the peace in France or set any protests?
Actually, I'm thinking about 2 points to answer your questions, Lashimi. So the first one is the recent discussions with the larger corporations, the GAFAs, I think it's called. Is it in English? The Google, Facebook. So to make sure that they will be paying their taxes, and that will be having an impact. And also the CBAM, so the carbon border adjustments that's been discussed in Europe. So that's really something that France is pushing forward, and that will really help companies to be going towards a lower energy consumption.
Okay, thank you so much. So there was a great question here, which I've lost. Yeah, okay. So let's go with this one then. So Eloise, let's go with your question about what citizens' action can speed political mobilization. And let's ask that one of Mariam. Yeah, so Eloise, would you like to ask your question of Mariam?
Yeah, of course. So, yeah, Minister Mariam, I'd be very interested to know what citizens' actions can speed political mobilization for climate change.
I think something that Lashini mentioned earlier is the use of social media. When word gets out, when you have evident examples in people's face, and they share their experiences, whether that be doing work that helps with the climate, or like statistics that are just short statistics that are shown. Such use of social media is really powerful. It's this idea that the voice of lots of individuals can really bring people together and make them inspired, and then they continue to do things that help the environment.
Brilliant. So I think we've got one question here from Grace Onions that I'd like to ask. So if you can see it in the Q&A, this is a question about redressing the balance of fantastic sustainable changes by individuals to protect and conserve the environment compared to the huge inaction of government and in terms of protecting the environment. So a little bit of a long question here. It's to do with more to do with the environment, nature, biodiversity. Eloise, would you like to have a go at this one? So can you see the question in the Q&A?
Let me check it. So it's the one from Grace?
Yeah, the first one from Grace. How can you redress the balance? Do you want to just read it out and then answer it?
So I'm just trying to find it. There's been a couple of questions here. So the first one.
How can you redress the balance?
Oh yeah, okay, I got it here. So I'm sorry, I'm just reading it now. That's that's quite a big question to answer. Well, I think it's also down to responsibility, and it goes back to acting at a local level. That's what I think is like when people know the impact in their own environment, it makes it personal, and it's easier for them to feel responsible for it. So that would be my quick answer, but obviously it's a very, very long topic to discuss.
I mean, what I would say, Grace, is that there's now a growing set of documents. There's the G7 communique. There's the world leaders' commitment to nature. There's the UK and Europe and the US are making these commitments on reducing CO2 emissions. I mean, for me, what's really, really important is that we all hold the governments to account. And I think picking up on some of the points made earlier, we need to be holding them to account on these numbers, certainly at a minimum annually. We can't afford this 5-6 year wait we've had since 2015. We've got to be holding them to account. And I think we've got to be holding them to account not only nationally, but locally. Local road schemes, local trees being cut down, local habitats being destroyed. It's got to be local, and it ties into everything everybody's been saying here. Jacob, Mariam made these points, communities earlier. I think this is critically important. So look, guys, the answers were quite amazing. Thank you so much for participating in this with your questions and answers. So I think we're coming to the end here. So what we'd just like to do is just to go around and everybody summarize their final points. If people would like to, if panelists would like to put into the chat any information about your projects, your things, your ideas, please do that, and just take this opportunity of making your final point about what you think on this critically important subject. But for me, Gary, I don't know what you think, but the answers to what we've discussed here, the scope of answers in this hour and a quarter has just been completely amazing. And I look forward to seeing most of you in important political positions in the future. And all three of you, I can see you standing up in the House of Commons and answering questions. So please do make sure that you are you're actually in a position of to take action on this. So who'd like to go first in terms of their summary?
I'll go first.
Great, Mariam, thank you.
So mobilizing public support, as we have established, it is critical. And for me, it starts with educating. It starts with, having an understanding of the problems and expanding that, having the community talking about it, understanding their problems. And from there, we can find solutions to our problems. This is something that we can work together on, make a voice, make noise for the government and the international community to listen to.
Super, thank you. Excellent answer. Who's next?
I could go next.
Okay,
I would just say celebrate small victories, bring people along the road with you, and find co-benefits use the angle of co-benefits in climate change to garner more public support. For example, public health.
Co-benefits, really, really important. Yeah, we didn't talk about that so much earlier. Dominic.
I would just say that every young person is a future leader, and the voice of young people shouldn't be quietened. But everyone who's making decisions must consider future generations. And part of climate change, in terms of mobilizing that support, it's a case of showing people the seriousness of the situation, but also showing them the benefits. So at the heart of everything must be the interests of young people and future generations.
Okay, so this is you're asking politicians to consider the interests of young people, yeah, but on the other side, what more could young people do, Dominic, to be part of this?
Every single thing that's ever been done in campaigning, but pushing for greener solutions. So whether that be on a local level, whether that be on a regional level, whether that be on a national level, just think about the individual changes that can be done, but then also influencing the policy makers as well. So essentially use the voice wherever you can.
Fantastic. That's a really, really great message for young people. So be really good for us to promote that message. Excellent. So who's next?
I can go before Eloise.
Okay, Lashini.
We've spoken about voice a lot, and I think for me it's don't be afraid to use your voice, and that comes from at all levels. Don't be afraid to write anything you want to your MP and hold them to account for what they're doing in your borough, but also propose a solution. We're all such smart people, the attendees, the panelists in this call today. And, even from the chat, there are so many great ideas coming around, and we have our voice and we have that power. You have so much power from just being able to send a letter to your MP. And secondly, there are so many small changes we can make, beginning with, our fashion, our food, but also I think just in response to Martin L's comment in the chat about joining a campaign or an NGO, one I personally recommend is Greenpeace. I love following their Instagram account. There is so much I find out on there. And also this leads greatly on to Eloise, who is part of her own NGO. So on to Eloise.
Thanks, Ashini. So yeah, for me, it's really like there's a lot going on in Europe right now. We're talking about a carbon border adjustment. We're also extending the EU ETS to more industries. And the only thing missing here is the redistribution to citizens. And let's make sure that no one is being left out. So I just want to say to citizens, like, make your voices heard, and let's make sure that this policy also includes redistribution to citizens.
Fantastic. This for me, this carbon pricing is such a critically important point. I feel that the playing field has not been level. It's not been fair, in that people are not paying the true price of the fossil fuels that they use. And so the carbon price, it's about fairness. And with the redistribution that Eloise is talking about, then this redistribution really helps people on lower incomes. But people have to change. I mean, if people say, oh, well, I can't do this, I've been doing this for all these years, I can't do anything different, then those people may be in trouble. I mean, the framework that people are putting in place with carbon pricing and these adjustments and whatever, the framework is a framework that allows people to make different decisions within this, and to do things that are good for them and good for the planet. But if anybody says, oh, well, I've done it this way, I've always done it this way, I'm not going to do anything different, then those people are going to, sadly, they are going to be blocking the process, and they need to give some thought to what they can do differently along with everybody else. Okay, so anybody else, summaries? Have we all done our summaries? Great. Well, thank you very, very much to everybody. Thank you for the speakers for your hard work. Thank you for being willing to take questions on the stage, difficult questions, because you set some of the questions yourself, so they were difficult. I'd like to ask anybody on the live or anybody watching the replay, do give some thoughts to the fantastic ideas that have come up here. There are so many things people can do: communities, community action, local action, writing to your MP. There's so many ideas come up here. Do please follow up with these. Let's get some real action coming out of this. And as I said at the beginning, for anybody, first of all, action to cut CO2 emissions is really, really important. And then when you've done that, think about taking action to remove your carbon footprint. And that's where we at noco2.org can help. Let's build up those 400,000 trees we've already planted. Let's get that ramped up as quickly as possible to 1 million trees and more, because every 100 trees, this is the co-benefits, every 100 trees creates a day's work for a family in extreme poverty. And it also, those trees also create new habitats for wildlife, etc. So, and by the way, it's basically, it's 9 trees for £1. So every £1 you donate, you get 9 trees. So big thank you to our amazing panelists. Thank you so much. Big thank you to our audience as well. And a big thank you to our forthcoming audience on the replays. Thank you so much. Make contact with me if you like what you're hearing here. Follow us on the Instagram page, which we've updated, and do in particular make contact with me on LinkedIn. So again, finalize, Gary, over to you. Some words from you.
Yeah, just to wrap up, and a big thank you to everybody. You're inspiring, all of you, and I agree with Charles. You are tomorrow's leaders, and I think we're in good hands. I'm sorry for what we've done already. So to wrap up the evening, guys, have a lovely weekend, and keep making a good difference. We're back on the 15th of August.